Resident Evil. Yeah, it's a series that conjures a lot of powerful images, and one that in the last decade has gone from straight to strength. It's a powerhouse franchise that's pushed the envelope in the action horror genre, and is really the only contender left standing in 2026, leaving behind the bloated corpses of contemporaries like Dead Space and Evil Within. I mean, sure, Silent Hill is making a comeback, sort of, but it's not really in the same league as Resident Evil. Resident Evil never needed to make a comeback because it never stopped coming. What? It's been going strong for 30 years, which is longer than some of the people watching this have been alive. But that doesn't mean it hasn't stumbled and lost its way. Now, if you were doing Gangnam Style in the early 2010s and not buying Bitcoin for some absurd reason, you might have seen the 3DS was getting its own Resident Evil, a spin-off that wasn't a rail shooter or some weird online affair powered by dial-up internet. A full-fledged title with Jill Valentine firmly in the driver's seat. That game was Resident Evil Revelations. A middle child of history trapped between the baffling design choices of Resident Evil 5 and 6, not sure which sibling it wants to follow, or if it needs to forge its own path. It was a modest success on the 3DS, but didn't really hit its stride until it was ported to consoles, given a bit of polish, and throughout to contend with a cold and empty world of console shooters that still hadn't been blessed by the sublime perfection of Fortnite. Now, normally with these videos, I like to pick a game which is deeply flawed. A diamond in the rough that needs more love and affection, or a title that missed the mark but not for a lack of try. Resident Evil Revelations is neither of those things. Honestly, it's actually pretty damn good. But at the same time, it feels like an oddity. A game trying to be a lot of things to a lot of people, but not really succeeding at any of them. So let's dive in and take a look at why that is. The story begins with Jill and a new partner, Parker, on the high seas, sent to investigate the disappearance of Chris aboard the cruise ship Queen Zenobia. It's a flimsy premise at best for setting the game on the open ocean. One I am certain was driven by the studio's need to keep Jill freshly stocked in the skin-tight bodysuits, after they realized how incredible she looked ported into one of those during RE5. Once you get control of that heroine, you're going to immediately realize that it's not being the nil child allegations anytime soon. Sure, it looks really good for a game that came out on the 3DS, but even with a fresh coat of paint, it's not really a graphical powerhouse of the Sims generation. The boxy levels and low poly models just scream former handheld title, despite Capcom's efforts to update the game for modern audiences. Now, I am not saying it's a bad-looking game. Far from it. But this is the Academy, and we've got to call it like we see it. Besides, if you're anything like me, you're gonna be spending most of the time angling the camera at Jill's butt anyway. So it's not like either of us are gonna really notice. What you are gonna notice, however, is the game's new enemies. It's a new Resident Evil, and that means we need a new strain of the T-virus to contend with. This one is the T-Abyss virus, a mutated version of the T-virus spliced with some fishy DNA someone scraped from the ocean floor. It makes the victim absorb water, giving them a decidedly bloated, aquatic feel. I'm not really sure if it works, honestly. But I am giving points for effort anyway, since it would have been far too easy for Capcom to just wheel out a fresh batch of zombies and call it a day. We get a little exposition about how this all began, with every writer's best friend, a news broadcast, to tell you how a floaty city called Terra Grigia was built, only for the terrorist group Veltro to be deeply offended, to the point they need to flood the city with bioweapons and kill every single living person on it. The FBC, seeing that they were about to be out-mobbed by a bunch of nobodies, decided to just nick the site from orbit, beating them to the punch and leaving us where we are today, with viral debris washing up on city shores. In the game's tutorial for its unique Genesis hook, it's a little doodad that lets you scan the area, either cataloging organic matter for DNA samples, or the surrounding area for hidden items. It's a neat little hook, one you can whip out at any time and flash the surroundings with, while not slowing gameplay down to crawl as you would if you were back in the PS1 days of humming walls for items. Plus, if you scan something living, you get bonus points, meaning there's an extra layer of risk instead of just going with the safe play of scanning their corpse. Get 100% on your sample, and you'll get a free green herb, which is the game's one and only healing item. No one mixing herbs or looking for first aid sprays. This is a post-Resident Evil 5 world, and things are streamlined whether you like it or not. Stepping back from the flashback, Parker and Jill is still hot on Chris's tail, searching every inch of the Queen Zenobia. It doesn't take long to locate him, tied up unconscious, leaving Jill on a classic Resident Evil key hunt to break him out. That means going from room to room, scanning whatever you can get your hands on, while dodging the rank and file of the T-Abyss devotees. Your handgun definitely lacks stopping power, but let's be real. Using a handgun is one step removed from fighting naked in a Resident Evil game. Plus, it's actually upgradable. For now, it's enough to deal with the legions of zombies, as we get to see someone's ticket being punched as Jill arrives a split second too late to save them. Now, normally in a Resident Evil game, that's not a problem, but Chekhov's gun is fully loaded here, and we'll be seeing updates on this little development a little later. For now, our recently departed sex bot has the key to Chris's cell, which means we're home free. Just gotta pop the door, release Chris, and we're out of here, and okay, he's a fake. Huh. Jill looks pretty confused to see the life-sized anatomically correct real doll of her beloved partner that she ordered has been delivered early, but doesn't get time to contemplate how she's going to explain any of this to Parker, as the room is flooded with gas and gets knocked out cold. Revelations is a game divided into chapters, designed to make things easier for gaming on the go if you will play on your DS. So we get thrust into the woolly boots of Chris and his new partner Jessica, who are up in the frigid mountains, chasing down the cause of a plane crash on behalf of the BSAA. Jessica is honestly one of the best parts of this game. Revelations has an ongoing terminal problem where it tends to lean into comedy a little too hard at times, but Jessica is a whole other level. Let's get this out of the way. She's horny for Chris. Really horny. In the sense that she will wear deeply impractical outfits whenever she's around him, and use any opportunity to just have the most wildly inappropriate dialogue at the absolute worst times.
Me and my sweet ass are on the way.
But women don't get turned on by safe. They crave danger.
There's horny, there's horny, then there's Jessica. This woman would absolutely populate a minivan for Chris without a second thought. The solution for continuing the Redfield bloodline was in front of Chris the whole time, but he was too blind to see it. Turns out it was all wasted effort anyway, since the mission was a setup to get Jill and Parker out into the middle of the ocean or something. It's not important anyway. The takeaway here is that Veltro are back and behind everything. We get a lovely pang shot of Jill's wetsuit before she wakes up in a bedroom still on board the Zenobia. Of course, the decor is pulled straight from the Spencer Estate catalog of 2005, because this is a Resident Evil game and we need to shoehorn in a mansion somehow. You've been stripped of your weapons and stuck for a way out, which in this case is a screwdriver taped to the bottom of the toilet for some reason. It's a set for the circuit panel puzzles, which were clearly designed with these styles in mind. Moving the circuit thingies on a note thingies to open the door still works just fine with the controller, and they're not so difficult that you won't be able to solve them in a few seconds provided that your intelligence is floating somewhere above room temperature. Dodge the floating infected long enough and we get our weapons back, in addition to being given access to the upgrade mechanic. Storage boxes now come packed with the ability to jam upgrades into your weapon, provided that you found them throughout the levels. And it's not bad. Nothing game-breaking than I ever found, but another nice little incentive to scan your surroundings. On the bridge, we discover that naturally the communications weapon has been destroyed and our tugboat has been blown up, leaving us stranded on the Zenobia with no communications to the outside world, because it wouldn't be much of a hard game if we could still leave anytime we wanted to. Jill gets attacked by a man with the world's most chiseled features, who is immediately revealed by a flashback to be one of Parker's former workmates of the FBC back on Terra Grigia. They were both working for a man named Morgan Lansdale, whose design was so striking that Capcom just decided to use him again in Street Fighter 6. The walking style statue is a cadet named Raymond, and Jessica is here too, dressed far more conservatively since Chris was nowhere in sight. The whole flashback goes down on the day of the Terra Grigia incident, and is nothing more than a glorified horror mode. We're just running non-stop through the FBC headquarters, looking for a way off the island before it gets sent packing the same way Raccoon City was. You're fighting off hordes of hunters and nothing else, which I find hard to take seriously since to me their design always looks so a little goofy. Not just in this game, but every Resident Evil. I know they're supposed to be this psychotic monster and all, but to me they just look like angry, muscular frogs with teeth. Give me liquors any day. The things I could do with that tongue? Oh, it really makes you think. Where was I? Oh yeah. We get treated to the destruction of Terra Grigia once more, before getting yanked back to reality again, with Raymond K. Hessel doing his best to be dark and mysterious before just wandering off. Now, don't get me wrong, I like setting up a little ambiguity with our characters, but just letting a guy walk off because he started talking like a fortune cookie after taking a blow to the head seems like an odd decision to make. Should probably check for a concussion. Get that out of the way, it's back to the staples of Resident Evil. Key hunting, fighting off the undead, or jamming round pegs and round holes to unlock shotguns because, honestly, I don't understand why you'd have a gun strapped to a wall in the suite of a cruise ship. Guess pirates are a bigger threat in the high seas than I thought. The red holes are next up, which is connected by a neat little airlock, which is intended to mask loading into the next area. It takes forever if you're on the console version, but I was surprised to discover that Ramus came on the modern PC with an SSD. It's not exactly speedy either. It's our new hub area, connecting to several major areas we'll be visiting over the next few hours. Turns out before we can track it to the ship's comms area, we need to hit the promenade and find the comms officer who has the key. But before you do that, make sure you head upstairs to a little area tucked up to the side which connects to the pool. This area is entirely optional, and the main story will never steer you here. So if you don't do a little exploring, you'll never find the sniper rifle, which is going to be crucial for an upcoming boss fight. Also, you need to filter the pool before you can explore the rest, which means coming back later according to Parker. So the earlier you get out of the way, the better. Did I mention a boss fight? Yeah, let's talk about that. Down the promenade, you're going to find a comms officer. You best believe that once he released the Bay Chungus from where he's locked up, you are in for a fight. Resident Evil is a series where I never really call the boss fights particularly challenging. Usually as long as you're properly prepared and have stockpiled your best ammo, the Dowls are contender for the world's greatest one-sided shootouts. But the developers of Revelations clearly didn't get the memo. Every boss fight in this game is genuinely challenging, and even on normal difficulty, you are at a real risk of dying. Skagdead, as he's known, is fast for his size, comes equipped with several dosing attacks, including leading bear traps on the ground, and has a health pool which, being described as tanky, doesn't really do it justice. That would be bad enough on its own, but the whole area is filled with monster closets that do nothing but pump out zombies in case you are getting bored with running blindly for your life. There are several gas cylinders scattered around the area that you can try to use to get some easy damage, but I cannot stress enough how he laughs them off like a skib rash. I've played a lot of Resident Evil games, but I'm not kidding when I say this is absolutely one of the fights I look forward to the least on every replay. Anyway, if you manage to put him in the dirt, you'll gain access to the comms room, where our old buddy Raymond is waiting right next to a smoking console, like he didn't just trash it himself before trying to play it off as the dog's fault. We had treated to a little YouTube video of leader Veltro monologuing about all the evil stuff he's gonna do before switching back to Chris and Jessica, because Chris needs to remind us that if he isn't trying to save Jill, he's bereft of motivation for anything that isn't punching boulders. You see, Alumnus Games themes are spent hovering around the idea of partnership. Who you work with, who you can trust, and in the case of Jessica, who you can feverishly hope will pound you through the mattress. Now, don't get me wrong. Resident Evil can't always be about stopping Umbrella or whatever rascally rapscallion whisker is cooking up for the week. But here, the game is already starting to feel a little unfocused. We've got our main characters of Jill, Parker, but also Chris and Jessica. Raymond is asking us to find Rachel, who is his partner. And we also just met Grinder and Jackass in the last cutscene, who, don't worry, I'll get to. Point is, with all this going on around Jill and Parker, there isn't a lot of time to set up Veltro and who they are. The game is trying its best to keep all the balls in the air and moving at the same speed, but I'm not really feeling like there's much atmosphere or impending dread that I get with other, more revered Resident Evil titles. We don't even know anything about the T-Abyss virus itself beyond it looks like Mountain Dew Code Red, and ingesting it has a similar effect. Setting the game on board a cruise ship was a decent enough idea for giving us a claustrophobic, self-contained play area, but the game undermines itself by constantly shifting to different places and time periods to remove that sense of ominous foreboding. It feels like the game is squandering its biggest set piece, for the sake of catering to other characters and themes it never really does much with. We're chasing down Rachel now, who was the prodigiously endowed lady who got Minecrafted in the opening act that we saw earlier. Naturally, she is nowhere to be found once we return to the scene of the crime, but it seems like she's not actually dead. Not undead either. She left behind a journal which she kept curiously up to date, detailing the mutations she underwent in her declining mental state. In any case, we need to chase her down in order to get access to the ship's bilge, which means following her all over the opening areas of the game as she keeps popping up to try and tear our face off, before retreating into the vents to try again a few minutes later. I'm not sure if you'd call this a boss fight, since there are brief interludes between each encounter, but she qualifies if you ask me, because she is definitely as tanky as our old buddy Skagdead, twice as fast and just as eager to separate Jill's head from her body. She's her all the way back to the galley where there's a Trish vending machine, which combined with the Veltro leader's love for Cordy Dante seems a little on the nose. And you'll finally get to extract the bilge key from her corpse after dealing with another monster closet in an enclosed space. With the key in Jill's hot little hand, we get to spend some more time with our next duo, Jackass and Grinder. They're real names, but I can't be bothered to remember them, and neither should you since that's all they ever call each other. They're the comedy relief, and that's apparently something that Revelation was lacking up to this point. A duo comprised of a stoner and a nerd who clearly sees a restraining order as a challenge, with both of them being grossly underqualified for any of the work that they're about to do. Anytime you're forced to take control of them is sadly the low point of the game, and the banter they share will have you reaching for a power drill because it's only a terrible day to have ears.
This is definitely for mature viewing audiences.
Mercifully, the time we spend with them here is pretty brief. Regardless, the siren call of the village is in the air and Jill is going to answer. And she's probably going to wish she hadn't because solving a few puzzles to get a key that restores power to the ship results in her getting locked in a room with Parker that quickly begins to flood. Not sure what engineer decided that putting the consoles responsible for ridding massive amounts of power through the entire ship should be the same room that can be flooded on a whim, but they should probably be fired. Don't get too excited by the prospect of discovering the fate of Jill and Parker, because the game has detected that you're having too much fun. So that means we get to spend a little quality time with Jackass and Grinder before returning to the characters you actually give a damn about. There's still hay out of a crash site in the mountains, only this time you get to enjoy a little combat with some hunters who have the ability to render themselves invisible. The saving grace of these two brain donors is that Grinder comes equipped with an assault rifle and a shotgun right out of the gate. So at least you're not struggling with a pistol as you fight off the reject Battletoads. Jackass hacks into the computer of the crashed plane, which is somehow still completely functional, discovering the location of the Queen Zenobia. He's perplexed because it appears that Veltro are also looking for the ship, which makes no sense because if anyone would know where it was, it should be Veltro. If that sounds like a trap to you, then congratulations, you're smarter than these two half-wits and twice as well qualified. Jessica and Chris just happened to be in the neighborhood, allowing them to immediately descend on the Zenobia and allow Chris to do what he does best, which is obsess over the fact that Jill could be in danger. And she is, but that shouldn't stop us from making fun of him for it. Any section of the game you're not controlling Jill and Parker expect to be extremely combat heavy, and Chris is no exception. The game wastes zero time just throwing waves of T-Abyss mutations at you. You're simply worried that all the survival horror is getting boring in this survival horror franchise. Make your way down to the bills to save Jill, only to discover that, oh my god, it's empty. How could this be? Easy, it turns out. The Queen Zenobia has a sister ship, the Queen Semiramis, which is completely identical in every way, right down to the fact it's stuffed to the gills with zombies after being completely abandoned for years. If you think two identical cruise ships with equal levels of decay and infestation of the undead is a highly improbable coincidence, which challenges the credibility of the game's writing, sister, you have not seen anything yet. Back to our favorite duo of impromptu divers, they're left to fend for themselves as Jill discovers a handy pipe to tear the latch open. Naturally, that breaks immediately, so she just finds another one and does it again, this time with greater success. Having managed to avoid drowning,
We've managed to avoid drowning.
we're back to exploring the ship, looking for answers as the mystery of Veltro deepens. Push through to the observation deck, and you get the pleasure of fighting the game's next boss. Draghi Nazo. But Sugar comes off its pal back in the promenade. He's a hulking T-Abyss mutation who follows the classic rules of Resident Evil combat. Shoot the fleshy weak spots while dodging every time he charges at you. He's not quite as challenging as Skagdead, thanks to this being a 2-on-1 fight, and having more room to maneuver, so he just makes up that by being extremely tanky. Blowing a few new holes in his chest will get you the Veltro keycard, allow you to finally get the comms up and running. Chatting with your boss reveals that someone has a satellite cannon that blew up Terragresia aimed directly at the Queen Zenobia, ready to fire, meaning that it's time for you to get your sweet ass out of there. Sadly, escape isn't an option, which means you're left trying to find a way to disrupt the satellite cannon. Jackass chimes in, saying there's a drone on the foredeck which can discharge chaff to confuse his targeting systems. The prospect of Jill getting saved by Jackass might be enough to make her embrace the sweet release of death instead, but Parker is still here, so we should probably save him. The foredeck is just stacked with those goofy, silly little hunters, but if you can punch through them, it gets revealed that Morgan Lansdale and the FBC were the ones looking to rain down Heaven's judgment on Zenobia. Hope you like time sections because you've got 5 minutes to make it to the control for the drone, because for some reason they're in the ass end of the ship. Between you and the other controls are just every infected enemy the game can throw at you, including another Skagdead and infected racial. Manage all that and we'll launch the drone, setting out butts, but not without the ship being cruelly damaged by the fallout. The ship is scuttled, and the only hope now is for Chris to make it in time to save Jill and Parker. Oh, and Raymond, I guess. Is he still sticking around? From here is just one giant set piece as we try to escape the ship as it sinks into the ocean around us. But if that is too much excitement for you, then strap in because we're yanked back into the shoes of Chris and Jessica for another turret section to shoot whatever the hell those things are. They're pushed to Zenobia. There's something about the turret sections of this game that just lacks sauce. Usually a turret section is an excuse to cut loose and have some fun, but I think it's just the fact that these miniguns feel like you're shooting confetti that really ruins what should be an otherwise nice break in the action. Make her on board, and Jessica will prove the sinking ship full of zombies is no excuse not to try and seduce your partner, before the leader of Veltro himself just pops out of nowhere, ready to spill the beans on the mystery of the Zenobia and why everything until now has happened. Naturally, that means he gets Minecrafted by Jessica before he can say a word, which we can file under very reasonable and unsuspicious actions that a person would take. Parker peels off his mask to reveal that our mystery man was Raymond for some reason. This is really the moment where, as a player, you begin to realize that Resident Evil Revelations is going far beyond the level of theater of any Resident Evil game that came before it. Sure, Resident Evil has never shied away from getting a little silly and theatrical at times, but now we're going way down a rabbit hole, conspiracies and spectacle that would put any AI TikTok drama to shame. And trust me when I say, if you think we're at the tippy top of the mountain, student, we are only just getting started. But we can't leave yet. We still need to snag some evidence on why this all went down to begin with. And now that Jessica is altered forward the only witness, that means hang to a secret laboratory hidden away on the ship, because this is a Resident Evil game, and if you thought we weren't gonna find one of those, I applaud your optimism, you poor, sweet summer child. We run to a new anti-type called the Scarmiglione, who looks like knights with shields, because I remind you that this is Resident Evil, and trying to explain the logic of any mutation is a fool's errand. There's one more chapter with Jackass and Grinder, but I am completely past the point of caring about them, so we're moving on. Plus, it's just a horde mode to get more info on Veltro anyway. Back to Chris and Jill, who have stumbled upon an area where the T-Abyss virus was created, who now set themselves the mission of sanitizing it before their ship is done sinking, which it is now doing very slowly because the plot demands it. Get ready for a bunch of laser grid puzzles which can only be seen with your scanner, making them not particularly fun or challenging. The real challenge here is that the ammunition does start getting a little sketchy at this point in the game. And given how you now have so many weapons, you're storing unused ones back in the iron box, you might find yourself flush with ammo for a gun that you don't carry, while running on empty for the ones that you do. This gets more frustrating when there's a cap on how much ammo you can carry, meaning that you'll be forced to leave ammo behind because the game limits how much you can have on you at any given time. Manage all that, and our old friend Morgan will pop on screen to have a chat with Chris and Jill. Turns out the FBC are the real bad guys here. He does the villainous monologue thing where he explains that he can't allow our heroes to live any longer. But before we can hear any more, we're pulled back to essentially frustrated supermodel Jessica and her wacky sidekick Parker. Sadly, we get put in control of Parker, probably because the devs knew that even direct control from the player couldn't keep Jessica from throwing herself at Chris. It follows the standard rules of every other sequence where you're not controlling Jill, where survival horror is at the window in favor of running and getting your way towards the objective. But get to the bridge, and Parker pulls a gun on Jessica, claiming she's a mole sent by Lansdale. Raven shows up because I warned you the crazy train hadn't even left the station yet and certainly has no brace. Turns out he had a bulletproof vest on when Jessica shot him. But none of this makes sense the moment you think about it, because if Raymond was still working for the FBC, why is he pulling a gun on Jessica? And why did Jessica shoot him to begin with? Why did he bother going through with the spectacle of dressing up as the leader of Veltro? Parker has a change of heart and lowers his gun, trying to get Raymond to do the same. This results in Jessica shooting Parker, who decides he needs to body block the shot aimed at the man who has already survived being shot by Jessica once for some obscure reason. She had to base the ship self-destruct, because apparently it was not sinking fast enough. Now the action is really kicked into high gear, and we have to escape the ship for realsies this time before it blows up around us. Jill finds Parker licking his wounds, and now we have to haul him off to safety as well. Sadly, that doesn't last long, as just a few minutes later, Parker falls into a fire pit, and the man who punches a 15-ton boulder, I asked the AI to do the math, suddenly lacks the grit strength necessary to haul a portly Italian man to safety, resulting in Parker falling to his death while uttering a few sentimental last words. With Parker dead and Raymond AWOL, there is no reason to stick around, as we get thrust into another time section, this time to make it bow the ship for a dramatic rescue. Regular on the deck of the ship is an extremely frustrating experience, as you'll find yourself getting repeatedly clubbered by falling objects that don't seem like there's any obvious way to dodge. make it through that gauntlet, and we get this massive... Honestly, I have no idea what this thing is. It's giving Cella vibes from RE5. A charge which only rings more true when you realize the mechanics are shooting its projectiles while waiting for a big gun to become accessible to do the real damage. Difference here is that its rocket launcher is being dropped by a pilot. The clock is still running on the fight, so try not to dawdle. But if he is saying a rocket launcher and just hold on to it, you will make the real last boss of the game a little less insufferable. Oh, did I spoil things? Yeah, he's not the final boss. Do enough damage, he gets thrust into a turret section, blasting chunks out at him in a section that definitely overstays its welcome, before finally finishing the job, and getting on Teams call with your boss to... Christ, we're back in another flashback with Parker and Rachel escaping Tergregia. The whole level is a nothing burger, so we're skipping it. It's just window dressing to show that Parker and Raymond were buddies before their untimely demise aboard the Zenobia. The real payoff is at the end of the level, where we could see Lansdale chatting with the real leader of Veltro. Sees Morgan was working with them to organize the whole Tergregia incident, while also double-crossing Veltro by organizing for the T-Abyss virus to break out aboard their ship. Honestly, at this point, if you're a character in Revelations and you're not the process of double-crossing someone or being a double agent, I suspect you're feeling quite left out. Oh, and Raymond and Parker are both still alive and unharmed, despite the fact we saw Parker fall to a fire pit and the Zenobia should be at the bottom of the ocean by now. This might be a flashback to before it's say, but I honestly don't care at this point because we are way past the point of me suspending any of my disbelief, and I feel like he might be right behind me. Speaking of which, back with Chris and Jill, we find out O'Brien was behind the whole resurrection of Veltro. He faked their return in order to draw out Lansdale, who he suspected was behind the Tergregia incident. He knew Lansdale would overplay his hand and try to erase any evidence of his involvement with Veltro should they rise from the ashes. But if you hold this premise up for skewed me for more than a few seconds, it just falls apart in your hands. Because it means O'Brien near the Zenobia was infested with T-Abyss infected, sent his own agents in on a false pretense to rescue Chris, only for his double agent Raymond to play the part of the Veltro leader and Drat Lansdale, who had his own double agent Jessica working to try and destroy the evidence any moment she wasn't trying to tear Chris's clothes off with her teeth. And he couldn't tell his own agents about any of this because Jessica might find out and relay the plan to Lansdale, despite the fact that at least 2 people are now dead. Okay, Raymond is alive, but he doesn't know that because of his actions. But wait! It gets stupider. O'Brien's own actions have allowed the FBC to storm the BSAA under the pretense of resurrecting Veltro, a charge which they are actually 100% guilty of. O'Brien is arrested by Lansdale, and he laments that Chris and Jill are now his only hope for proving Lansdale's guilt. And to do that, we need to head to, wait for it, a 3rd cruise ship. Yep, why have 2 identical cruise ships, Winnie? You can have 3. Veltro originally set up shop on the Queen Dido, a ship which has now been on the bottom of the ocean floor for a whole year since the Tergregia incident. This section sucks because it's an underwater level, and when was the last time you played a good one of those? Also, it's filled with giant blob monsters who are an instant kill if they catch you, so have fun dodging those. Once we reach the bowels of the ship, we encounter a handy recording by Jack Norman, a man who has been living down here for a whole year and looks curiously like my father. No, I'm not showing you a picture, but trust me when I say it's making me uncomfortable. Apparently surviving in the world's most breathable air pocket. Wait for someone to show up to watch the podcast that he's been recording. He's the real leader of Veltro, and we've shown up just in time to watch him rant about how he's carrying the evidence of Norman's wrongdoings. This is your warning that he's waiting in the next room. So grab your biggest, best guns, including that rocket launcher I told you to hold on to, because it's about to get messy. Find Norman orphaning on a throne. I mean, he's sitting on the bottom of the ocean for a whole year. What else is he doing to pass the time? And despite the fact that you're both out to take down Lansdale, he's itching for a fight anyway. This is where he makes good on the threat of chomping down on a whole vial of T-Abyss, mutating into a one-punch-man villain. That's not a joke, by the way. He can just fucking teleport. I'm sure someone in the comments will try to rationalize this, but to me it's just getting silly here and I'm not having any of it. Phase 2 is where things start to get more screwy. Once you inflict enough damage, Jack decides playtime is over and starts teleporting while also summoning shadow clones, and you need to shoot the one whose heart is exposed to do any damage before he smacks you like a mouthy 50s housewife. Mix that in with a consecutive teleport fakeouts, and this fight is deeply unpleasant. You can, however, skip the whole second phase if you were lucky enough to hang on to a rocket launcher from the previous boss fight. I didn't manage it in this playthrough, but I can tell you that while it won't end the fight altogether, it will do enough damage to skip the whole second phase if you were able to stag one. Face the fight and Jack will finally kill over, destroying the Veltro flag in a move that is probably meant to be deeply symbolic. But this is Resident Evil and we don't have time for that. We do get to watch his recording of his dealings with Lansdale, who hooked Veltro up with T-Abyss so he could be given more power and oversight to fight them. He prowls on about how the world is unprepared to deal with threats like Veltro, and the ends justify the means. O'Brien flips the script, arrests Lansdale, and we get our happy ending. There's a few mid-credit scenes of various characters, showing what happened after the ending of the game. Grinder and Jackass are still regrettably alive. Chris and Jill fly off into the deep blue sky. Our bride resigns over the whole "I created a fake terrorist organization and people are dead as a result" affair. Puck has lost the ability to read. And weirdest of all, we end the game with Jessica looking conservatively dressed for the first time in her entire life, reading the Divine Company, and getting a visit from Raymond, who drops off the T-Abyss sample like there wasn't just tons of the stuff dripping off the walls in the Zenobia. This scene is just a beautiful way to cap off the absolute insanity of the game's story, because it heavily implies that both Raymond and Jessica were triple agents, double-crossing both the BSAA and the FPC because they were working for TriCell the entire time. It makes zero sense, adds nothing to the story, and exists solely to add a twist to the story that was already so contorted, it makes a crazy straw look like a yardstick. Revelations is a weird game. It does everything right as a Resident Evil title. Big drama, a fresh setting with new enemies, returning favorites as protagonists, and enough variety that you never feel like you're doing the same thing for too long. But at the same time, none of those things ever feel particularly memorable or enjoyable. The story is contrived and needlessly overwrought. The set pieces are awkward and frustrating more often than not. And the combat never feels particularly satisfying. It's a game that lacks focus, trying to be something to everyone while failing to please anyone. This doesn't make it a bad Resident Evil. You could certainly argue there are worse titles, but it does make it feel bland, forgettable. Nothing of consequence occurs because every death is undone. Except Rachel, she got screwed. And characters change their allegiances as frequently as their weapon magazines. Should you play it? Absolutely. Should you revisit it? Probably not unless you're a big fan of raid mode. That's pretty robust. I've finished this game several times and I can say that each playthrough, even managing to follow the plot, doesn't really add to the experience. It's a goofy, silly game that you can play once and cross off your list, never to return to it. It's a good thing they never made a sequel.
Welcome to the brink of true fear.
Oh, god damn it.